The number on the page was wrong. Not wrong like a typo. Wrong like a knife. Asha Mensah had balanced these books for 3 years, and in 3 years the columns had always closed. Now a single entry sat in the ledger that should not exist, threaded between 2 payments she recognized, hidden so neatly that only the woman who built the system could have ever found it. Her pulse climbed into her throat and stayed there, thudding, a heart rate she could have called out at 140 if anyone had asked. Somebody had moved money through Han Tae-Joon's accounts and made it look like she had done it. She had come into this building tonight to do one thing. Quit. The resignation letter was folded in her bag right now, soft from being read and refolded 100 times, one clean sentence she promised herself she would finally say out loud. I'm done. 3 years of pretending she didn't understand what kind of man she really worked for. 3 years of looking at the ledgers and choosing not to look too hard. And on the last night, the very last night, the books had shown her the one thing she was never supposed to see. She should have closed the ledger. She should have walked out and never come back. Instead her fingers turned the page, because some part of her already knew that whatever this was, it had her name buried inside it. There. Her initials, AM, logged as the authorizing signature on a transfer she had never made. A transfer dated 3 weeks from now. Someone hadn't just framed her. Someone had scheduled it. A door opened somewhere down the corridor. Soft. Unhurried. The kind of footsteps that belonged to a man who never needed to rush, because everywhere he walked was already his. You're here late, Han Tae-Joon said. Asha did not turn around fast. Turning around fast is what guilty people do, and she had spent 3 years learning how a guilty building taught its people to move. She closed the ledger with the unhurried care of a woman shelving any ordinary book, and only then did she face him. He filled the doorway the way smoke fills a room, soft at the edges and impossible to push back out. His eyes went to the ledger under her hand. Then to her face. Then, just for a breath too long, to the rest of her, before he dragged his gaze back up like a man correcting a mistake he kept making. That look. She had felt it for 3 years and called it nothing. I was finishing up, she said. Her voice came out level. She was proud of that. Actually, I'm glad you're here. I have something for you. She reached into her bag and held out the folded letter, and the irony of it tasted like metal in her mouth. She had walked in tonight to hand him her freedom. Now she was handing it to him with a frame around her neck she didn't fully understand yet. He took the paper without looking at it. His eyes stayed on hers. Open it, she said. I don't need to. A pause stretched between them, heavy and dangerous. I know what it says. The question is why a woman who's been planning to leave for weeks suddenly looks like she's seen a ghost on the night she finally does it. The floor felt like it tilted half an inch under her low heels. Maybe I just realized how much I'm going to miss the filing system, she said. Something almost moved at the corner of his mouth. Not a smile. Tae-Joon didn't waste smiles. But the air between them shifted by a degree she felt on her skin. 3 years, he said quietly, and you think I don't know when you're lying to me. He stepped into the room. Not fast. Never fast. The shelves seemed to lean inward. She held her ground because running was an answer, and she wasn't ready to give him answers she didn't have yet. Show me the ledger, Asha. His hand landed on the cover. Hers was already there. For one suspended second their fingers shared the same cold leather, and neither of them moved, and the records room shrank down to that one square of contact under the lamp. If there's nothing in here, he said, low, you'll let go. If there's nothing in here, she answered, you won't need to look. His eyes searched her face for the lie and found only the thing underneath it, which was fear, and fear from Asha was a language he had never once heard her speak in 3 years. That was what made him pull the book out from under both their hands and open it. She watched him find it. Watched his eyes stop on the line, on the date, on her initials sitting where they had no right to be. The change in him wasn't loud. It was worse than loud. Every muscle in his face went still in a way that made the room colder. "This is your signature," he said. "It's my initials. I never authorized it. I've never seen it before tonight. It's dated 3 weeks from now." He looked up at her slowly. "You found a crime you haven't committed yet." The words hung there, impossible and exact. Somebody had planted a future inside the books, and stamped her name on it, and the only reason it had surfaced tonight was that she'd come to leave. "Whoever did this wanted you to find it," Tae-Joon said. "Or wanted me to find it on you, after you'd run." His voice dropped lower. "And you were about to run." The resignation letter was still in his other hand. He looked down at it now like it had become evidence. In a way it had. A woman quits with no warning, money moves under her name, and by the time anyone goes looking, she's gone. It was clean. It was elegant. It was the work of someone who knew exactly how this empire breathed. "I need you to understand something," he said. "From this second, you don't leave my sight. Not because I think you did this." His eyes held hers. "Because someone went to a great deal of effort to make sure you die before you could prove you didn't." "No." The word came out of her hard and fast. "I came here to get out, Tae-Joon, not to get traded for a smaller cage. You don't get to decide I'm yours to keep because someone framed me on your watch. I'm not keeping you." A muscle ticked in his jaw. "I'm keeping you alive. There's a difference, and the people who built this will spend the next 3 weeks teaching it to you." She hated that it made sense. She hated more that under all of it, in a corner of herself she'd kept locked for 3 years, a small treacherous part of her was not entirely sorry to have a reason to stay close to him. His hand found the small of her back to steer her out, and it was nothing, it was a hand, and her whole body lit up like a struck match anyway. She stepped forward fast enough to lose the touch and told herself it was urgency. They moved through the dark spine of the tower toward the private elevator, and she felt the building differently now. 3 years she'd walked these halls as staff. Tonight she walked them as a target. The elevator was too small for 2 people carrying this much. She kept her eyes on the floor counter ticking down. He kept his on the doors. The mirrored wall behind them showed her the 2 of them standing a careful foot apart, and somehow that foot of air felt louder than touching would have. "Who has access to my ledgers besides you?" he said. Not really a question. 3 people. Me. Sarah. And whoever Sarah lets in. She swallowed. And you. His silence told her he'd already done the same math and hated the answer it gave him. If it wasn't her, and it wasn't him, then it was someone he trusted. And in Tae-Joon's world, betrayal never came from strangers. It came from the people allowed close enough to know where the books were kept. Listen, if you've made it this far down into the dark with Asha, do one quiet thing before the next door opens. Hit subscribe. Not because anyone's barking an order at you, but because every single subscriber is the only signal this channel gets that the hours poured into stories this real, this dangerous, are landing somewhere that matters. It's literally the reason these keep getting made. So if your chest is tight and you need to know who set this trap, stay in the room with her, and subscribe. The lobby was almost empty at this hour, just a security guard and a cleaner moving slow across the far marble, but Tae-Joon walked her through it like the floor was mined. His eyes touched every face. By the doors he stopped, just for a breath, and she felt his attention sharpen on something past the glass. "Don't look," he said quietly. "Keep walking. Get in the car." She didn't look. She wanted to so badly her neck ached with not doing it. They crossed to the black sedan idling at the curb and he opened the door and put her inside with a hand that was steady when hers were not. Through the rain on the window, for half a second, she saw it anyway. A man across the street. Just standing. Just watching. Gone the instant the car pulled out, like he'd never been there at all. The thread she'd pulled in the records room had just told someone she'd found it. There was a man, she said. Across the street. Watching. I know. He didn't look at her. He's been there 4 nights. The casual horror of that landed in her stomach like a dropped stone. 4 nights. The trap in the books was 3 weeks out, but the eyes on the door were already here. Whatever was coming had been coming for longer than tonight. You knew someone was watching the building, she said slowly, and you let me walk out the front. I let you walk out beside me. Now he turned, and the look on his face was something she'd never seen on it. Not cold. Not controlled. If they wanted you taken, they'd have taken you weeks ago in that records room, alone, where no one would have heard. They didn't. That tells me they don't want you gone yet. They want you blamed. He paused. Which means as long as you're useful to their story, you're alive. The night you stop being useful is the night you disappear. He took her to the penthouse because there was nowhere safer, and because nowhere felt more like a trap than a beautiful place you can't leave. The city sprawled cold and glittering below the glass. She stood in the middle of all that wealth, feeling poorer than she ever had in her small warm apartment across town. There's a room down the hall, he said. It locks from the inside. I'm not coming in. I just need you behind a door I trust tonight. And tomorrow? Tomorrow we find out who put your name in my books. Sarah Kim arrived before dawn, the way Sarah always arrived, like she'd been standing outside the door the whole time waiting to be needed. She had been Tae-Joon's right hand for 6 years. She knew the books. She knew the doors. She knew where everything was kept. She looked at Asha standing in the penthouse in last night's clothes, and something flickered behind her eyes too fast to name. So it's true, Sarah said. She found it. Asha's skin prickled. She found it. Not someone tampered with the books. Not we have a problem. As if the only surprising part of tonight was that Asha had been the one to open the page. Tae-Joon caught it too. Asha saw him catch it. But he only said, pull every access log for the records room going back 6 months. I want to know every hand that touched those shelves. Of course, Sarah said smoothly. Though you understand the logs only show who badged in. Not who came in behind them. It was a reasonable thing to say. It was also, Asha realized, the exact sentence a person would say to explain in advance why their own name might appear on a log it shouldn't. She filed it away in the same locked corner where she'd started keeping things she couldn't prove. When they'd gone, Asha stood at the glass and watched the city turn from black to gray to a thin worn gold. She had a mission older than this building, older than Tae-Joon. 3 years ago she'd taken this job for one reason. Her younger brother had borrowed from the wrong people, and the only way to clear the debt without burying him was to get close to the man who held it. She'd planned to work it off quietly and vanish. She had never planned to start understanding Tae-Joon. She had never planned to look forward to the days he came down to the records room himself. And she had absolutely never planned for the way her heart had behaved tonight when his hand found her back. The job was supposed to end tonight. Instead it had its hand around her throat. She didn't hear him come back. She only felt the room change, the way it always did when he entered it, and turned to find him in the archway watching her like a man looking at something he'd decided long ago he couldn't have. You didn't sleep, he said. Neither did you. He crossed the room and stopped an arm's length away, close enough that she had to tip her chin to hold his eyes. Tell me the truth about one thing, he said. Why did you really take this job 3 years ago? And don't say the salary. Her pulse went to 130 in the space of a breath. He'd seen it. Of course he'd seen it. He saw everything except the one thing standing right in front of him. She almost told him. The truth sat right behind her teeth, her brother's name, the debt, the whole reason she'd ever walked into his world. If she told him now, in this gray light, with his guard down for the first time in 3 years, maybe she could stop being a woman with a secret in a house full of secrets. But a woman who confesses she came to him under false pretenses, on the same night her name turns up in his books, is a woman who hands her own neck to the noose. So she swallowed the truth, and the swallowing felt like betrayal, and she said only, because I needed it more than I was afraid of you. It was true. It just wasn't all of it. And the part she kept back would come for them both. By midday they were back at the tower, because hiding looked like guilt and Tae-Joon refused to look guilty in his own house. That was where Daniel Cho found them. Daniel Cho had been Tae-Joon's partner since the beginning, the smiling half of the operation, the man who shook the hands Tae-Joon didn't want to touch. He came into the office with his arms open and his teeth out. "There she is," Daniel said, beaming at Asha. "The woman who broke into the boss's books. Brave girl. Or a very stupid one." He laughed, and the laugh didn't reach his eyes. "Tae-Joon, brother, you can't keep her here. You know how this looks." "It looks," Tae-Joon said, "like someone forged an entry in my books and dated it 3 weeks out. Which means whoever did it is still in this building, still walking around, still smiling. Why would I let the one person who found it walk away?" Daniel's smile held, but Asha watched the temperature behind his eyes drop a single degree. "Because keeping her close to you," he said softly, "is exactly what they'll point to when it falls apart. You're handing them the picture they want. Boss loses his head over the bookkeeper, lets her bury him. He spread his hands. I'm protecting you, brother. From yourself." It was a good performance. It was such a good performance that Asha almost missed the thing under it, which was that Daniel had walked in already knowing the entry was dated 3 weeks out, a detail no one had told him. She kept her face perfectly still. The thread had just shown her which hand was holding the other end. She waited until Daniel left. Then she crossed to the desk and set it low, in case the walls had Daniel's ears in them. He knew the date. Tae-Joon went still. "What?" "The entry. That it's dated 3 weeks out. You and I and Sarah are the only people who've opened that ledger since last night. So how does Daniel know the date?" She let it sit. Unless he knew before there was anything to find. For a long moment Tae-Joon said nothing, and she watched a man rearrange 6 years of his life behind his eyes in real time. When he spoke, his voice had gone to a place she hadn't heard from him before, quiet and terrible. "If you're right," he said, "then I've been trusting the man who's going to kill me. And I just let him meet your face." "Then we don't tell him we know," she said. "We let him think the plan's still working. We let the entry sit. And we follow the money he thinks is hidden." Tae-Joon looked at her like she'd grown a second head. "You came here last night to quit. And someone made that impossible." Her chin came up. "So if I'm trapped in your war, Tae-Joon, I'm not going to be the bait. I'm going to be the one who finds out who loaded the gun." Something moved across his face then, fast and unwilling, and she understood with a small electric shock that it was respect, and that respect from this man was a more dangerous thing to be handed than fear. That night Asha's phone rang, and it was Nadia Sao, her oldest friend, the only person in the world who knew why Asha had ever taken this job. "Asha, where are you? You didn't come home, I've been calling." Nadia's voice was thin with fear. "A man came to the apartment today. Asking for you. He knew about your brother. He knew about the debt. Asha, he knew everything, and he said to tell you that if you help the Korean, your brother stops being a name on a ledger and starts being a body." The floor opened up under Asha all over again. The one secret she'd kept from Tae-Joon, the lever she'd prayed no one would ever find, was already in someone's hand. And they were using it to push her off his side. "If you're still here, still in this with Asha while the walls close in, prove it to me right now. Drop the single emoji that matches exactly how your body feels this second. And tell me where in the world you're watching from and what time it is where you are, because I want to know who's awake in the dark with her. If you're watching this on your TV, just reach over and tap that like so I know you're in the room." She stood in the dark hallway long after the call ended, the phone still warm against her ear, doing the only math that mattered now. Help Tae-Joon, lose her brother. Betray Tae-Joon, save her brother and hand the empire to the people who'd framed her. Every road led somewhere she couldn't live with. And the cruelest part, the part that made her want to laugh until she cried, was that whoever held this lever understood her better than the man down the hall did. They knew her secret. Tae-Joon didn't. And the moment he learned it, every soft thing growing between them would curdle into proof that she'd been a plant from the very first day. He found her there. Of course he did. He found everything. Who was that? He said. A friend. The lie was small and it still cost her something. She was worried I hadn't come home. He studied her in the low light, and she felt him weighing the lie, and for one suspended moment she thought he would push, and the whole house of cards would come down right there in the dark. Instead he stepped closer and lifted his hand and, with a gentleness that undid her more than any threat could have, tucked a loose curl back from her wet cheek. You don't have to tell me yet, he said. But you will. And when you do, I need you to trust that I am not the most dangerous thing in your life right now. His thumb traced the line of her jaw once and dropped away. I'm the only thing standing between you and it. They stood too close for too long. Her heart was somewhere up near 150 and she was certain he could hear it, certain the whole dark hallway could hear it. His eyes dropped to her mouth and stayed, and the careful foot of air they'd kept between them for 3 years thinned down to almost nothing. And then he stepped back. Deliberately. Like a man pulling his own hand out of a fire. Not while you're frightened, he said, rough. When you come to me, you'll come to me clear-eyed, or not at all. He turned and walked away down the dark hall, and Asha stood there shaking, wanting him, terrified of him, and more terrified of the truth she was carrying that would turn him into an enemy the second it surfaced. For 3 days they worked the books together in his study, two people who couldn't have each other circling a problem instead. And Asha, who had built the system Daniel was using to rob it, started to see the shape of the theft the way only its architect could. The forged entry under her name wasn't the crime. It was the alibi. The real money was leaving through a chain of shell accounts, slow and patient, dressed up as routine payments she herself had set up years ago. Daniel had been bleeding the empire for months and saving her name as the body to leave at the scene. He's not trying to take it from you, she said softly, the realization cold in her mouth. He's already taken most of it. The frame is just so that when you finally notice, you'll be too busy hanging me to chase him. The number, when they finally totaled it, was staggering. Daniel hadn't skimmed. He'd hollowed the place out from the inside like an egg, leaving a beautiful intact shell that would collapse the instant anyone leaned on it. Months of work. Patient, surgical, intimate work, the kind only a man who'd helped build the thing could do to it. Tae-Joon sat back in his chair and stared at the ceiling for a long moment, and when he spoke his voice was almost wondering. 6 years, he said. He stood beside me at my father's funeral. He held the casket. A short, awful laugh. And he's been planning my funeral since before the dirt settled on the last one. But Daniel Cho was not the top of the chain. He was only the hand. The money, when Asha traced it past the last shell, flowed up into something larger and older and far more patient, an American named Marcus Wright, a man who bought distressed empires the way other men bought distressed houses, who'd spent 2 years convincing Daniel that betraying Tae-Joon was simply good business. Wright didn't want to kill Tae-Joon. Killing made noise. Wright wanted the empire to fail so completely, so publicly, with such a clean villain to blame, that he could walk in afterward and buy the wreckage for pennies. In his own mind he wasn't a monster at all. He was just a man cleaning up after a kingdom that had grown too sloppy to defend itself. He genuinely believed Tae-Joon had it coming. Across the city, in a hotel suite that smelled of money and patience, Marcus Wright was telling Daniel Cho the same thing in different words. The bookkeeper found the entry early, Wright said, swirling his whiskey. That's a problem only if she lives long enough to explain it. You assured me she'd run. Instead she's sleeping in his penthouse. He set the glass down with a soft, final click. Fix it, Daniel. The girl is the only loose thread in an otherwise perfect garment. Cut her, and the whole thing falls exactly the way we sewed it. Daniel's smile had stopped working some time ago. And if he's already in love with her? Wright smiled for the first time. Then cutting her doesn't just close the thread, he said. It breaks the man. 2 birds, Daniel. 2 birds, 1 thread. The closer they got to the truth, the closer they got to each other, and neither of them could tell anymore where the war ended and the wanting began. They worked shoulder to shoulder through the small hours. He brought her tea the way she liked it without asking, which meant he'd been watching how she made it for 3 years. She caught him smiling once, a real one, brief as a struck match, and felt it in her chest like a wound. When this is over, he said one night, not looking up from the page, I'm going to ask you a question, and I'm going to want the whole answer. What question? Why a woman who clearly hates everything I am stayed 3 years? He looked up. And why she looks at me like she's already decided to forgive me for it. She didn't answer. She couldn't. Because the whole answer was the one thing that would end them. There was still Sarah. Asha hadn't forgotten the first night, she found it, the access logs Sarah could so easily explain away. So when Asha caught Sarah alone in the stairwell on the phone, voice low and urgent, she slowed her steps and listened. I told you, I'm handling my end, Sarah was saying. No. He doesn't suspect me. He'll never suspect me. A pause. Because for 6 years I've made sure of it. Asha's blood went to ice. She'd been so sure it was only Daniel. But the rot, it seemed, had more than one root. She got out of the stairwell before Sarah could turn, heart slamming, and stood in the corridor trying to breathe. Sarah and Daniel. 2 hands, not one. The empire wasn't being robbed. It was being dismantled by the 2 people Tae-Joon trusted most, while he poured all his attention into protecting the bookkeeper who'd stumbled into it. And the worst thought of all, the one that made her stomach drop, was the timing. Why now? Why move now, after years of patience? What had changed 3 weeks ago to set the clock running? She already half knew. The answer was her. The answer was that Tae-Joon had started looking at her, and a man in love is a man distracted, and Daniel and Sarah had simply waited for their boss to finally hand them the opening by losing his head over the woman in the records room. She told him about Sarah. She watched it land, watched the last warm thing in him go cold and quiet, because Sarah wasn't a partner he could rage at. Sarah was the person he trusted to stand at his back in a dark room. Sarah was the closest thing he had left to family. You're certain, he said. I heard her say 6 years, Tae-Joon. I heard her say you'd never suspect her. He was silent for a long moment, the green lamp throwing shadows up the walls of books. Then he did something that frightened her more than shouting would have. He smiled, slow and cold and final. Good, he said. Then they think they've already won. There's no animal more careless than the one that's sure the hunt is over. He looked at her. We're going to let them spring the trap. And we're going to be the only ones who know it's empty. The plan was Asha's, in the end, because Asha understood the books better than anyone alive, including the man who owned them. She would draft a document. A real one, legally airtight, the kind she'd quietly learned to write in 3 years of watching this empire move money. A separation agreement, dissolving her employment, transferring her out clean. And buried inside it, in language only Daniel would recognize, a clause that would look to him like the final piece of his frame clicking into place, the bookkeeper formally tied to the forged transfer, signing her own guilt. Except the clause didn't do what Daniel would think it did. It did something else entirely. Asha read it to Tae-Joon twice, slowly, and watched his cold face break into something that was almost awe. You realize, he said quietly, what you're handing yourself, if this works. I do. Half of everything I've built. On paper. Legally. The night you walk out. He shook his head slowly. You came here to quit, and you've written yourself the keys to the kingdom instead. The stage would be the charity gala at the end of the week, the one event of the year where Tae-Joon, Daniel, Sarah, and Marcus Wright would all stand in the same gold-lit room wearing the same polite smiles. Daniel thought the gala was where he'd finally hand Tae-Joon the forged ledger in front of witnesses and watch the empire crack in public. He thought Asha would be there as the sacrificial body. He had no idea she'd be there holding a pen. 3 weeks, the entry had said. The gala was 3 weeks out to the day. Daniel had told Asha the date himself, in the office, without realizing he'd handed her the one thing she needed. He'd shown her exactly when he planned to swing. On the night of the gala, Asha stood in front of the mirror in a gown the color of everything Daniel wanted to take, and she did not recognize the woman looking back. 3 weeks ago she'd been a bookkeeper with a folded resignation letter and a single terrified hope of getting out alive. Tonight she was the trap. Her phone buzzed once. Nadia. Please don't go. Whatever you've planned, please, your brother, please just disappear. Asha looked at the message a long time. Then she typed back the hardest thing she'd ever written. If I disappear, they win, and they kill him anyway. The only way to save him is to win first. Trust me. She turned the phone face down before she could lose her nerve. When she came down the stairs, Tae-Joon forgot, for one full second, every careful rule he'd built around himself. She watched it happen. Watched the man who controlled everything lose control of his own face, just for her, just for a heartbeat. If we both live through tonight, he said, low and rough, I'm going to tell you something I should have told you 3 years ago. Tell me now. No. A muscle worked in his jaw. If I tell you now and you die tonight, I'll have to live the rest of my life having said it to a ghost. So you'll just have to survive, won't you? He offered his arm. For both our sakes. The gala glittered like a trap dressed as a party, which is exactly what it was. 4 people moved through the gold-lit crowd, each certain they understood the game, each holding a piece of the truth, only one of them holding all of it. Daniel worked the room with his hand on Tae-Joon's shoulder, brother to the last, the forged ledger waiting in a leather folder by the stage. Sarah stood near the exits, watchful, her phone in her hand. Marcus Wright watched from a corner table like a man at the theater, waiting for the act he'd paid for. And Asha moved among them in gold, carrying a single folded document, doing the bravest math of her life. Daniel sprung it just before midnight, exactly as Asha had predicted, the leather folder produced with a sorrowful flourish in front of a small ring of the most important people in the room. Brother, I'm sorry, Daniel said, loud enough to carry. I can't watch you protect her anymore. I pulled the books myself. He opened the folder. A transfer. Authorized by your bookkeeper. Dated for tonight. She's been robbing you blind and you've been too busy betting her to see it. A ripple went through the gold-lit circle. Sarah shifted toward the exit. Marcus Wright set down his glass to watch. The whole machine Asha had been living inside for 3 weeks finally, beautifully, began to close. And Asha stepped forward into the center of it, calm as still water, and said, "May I see that?" She took the folder from Daniel's hand. She read the forged page aloud, calmly, to the whole circle, including the date, the amount, her own initials. She let them all see it. She let Daniel's smile widen with triumph. Then she set it down, and from her own small gold clutch she drew a second document, and her voice carried clear across the hushed gold room. "You're right that I signed something," she said, looking straight at Daniel. "But it wasn't this. 3 weeks ago, the night I came to resign, Mr. Han and I executed a separation agreement. Legally filed. Witnessed. Dated before your little forgery here." She unfolded it. "And there's a clause in it I drafted myself. Would you like me to read it, or would you rather I let the lawyers standing 20 feet away do it?" Daniel's face did something that the whole room would remember for years. The smile didn't fade. It fell, all at once, like a mask whose string had been cut. Because Asha's clause did the thing he'd never imagined a bookkeeper would dare. It didn't just clear her. The separation agreement, the one he'd never known existed, formally and legally transferred to Asha a 50% ownership stake in every holding of the empire, effective the moment any party attempted to use a fraudulent financial instrument to remove her. The forged transfer he just waved in front of 40 witnesses was that instrument. He had triggered the clause himself. In front of everyone. By trying to frame her out, Daniel Cho had just legally handed her half of everything. Tae-Joon stepped to her side, and the slow cold smile spreading across his face was the most dangerous thing in the room. "I'd be careful what you accuse my partner of, Daniel," he said softly. "She owns half of this now. Which means half of what you've stolen, you stole from her. And she is far, far less forgiving than I am." The lawyers were already moving. Wright was already standing, reading the room, calculating his exits. And Sarah, at the edge of it all, had gone very, very still. It should have been the moment of victory. It should have been the end. That was when the lights went out. Every light in the ballroom died at once. Not a flicker. A cut. The kind of darkness that doesn't happen by accident in a building like this. 40 wealthy people made the same startled sound, and under it, closer, Asha heard something else, the soft fast shuffle of someone moving with purpose through the dark, toward her. A hand closed hard around her wrist. Not Tae-Joon's. She knew his hands now, knew their warmth, and this hand was cold and gloved and certain. It yanked her sideways off her feet, away from the crowd, toward the dark service doors at the edge of the room, and a voice she didn't expect breathed close against her ear. "You should have run when you had the chance," Sarah whispered. Asha fought. She drove her gold heel down hard and twisted, but Sarah was strong and fast and had clearly done this before, and the dark service corridor swallowed them both before anyone in the panicking ballroom understood she was gone. "You don't understand anything," Sarah hissed, hauling her down a black hallway. "You think Daniel was the danger? Daniel was a fool with a grudge. I'm the one who's been keeping you alive for 3 weeks, you stupid woman, and you just made yourself impossible to protect." The words hit Asha sideways in the dark. Keeping you alive. Not the betrayer. The opposite. Nothing was what she'd thought. The thread she'd been pulling for 3 weeks had one more knot in it, and she was about to reach it in the dark. Sarah shoved her into the stairwell and let go, breathing hard, and in the harsh light Asha finally saw her face clearly, and it was not the face of a killer. It was the face of someone terrified. "The phone call you overheard," Sarah said. 6 years. He'll never suspect me. You thought I was confessing to betraying him. A short bitter laugh. I was talking to a federal handler, you idiot. I've been undercover inside this organization for 6 years. I'm the one building the case that takes Daniel and Wright down. And tonight, you just blew 3 weeks of careful work by making yourself the legal owner of a criminal empire on camera in front of 40 witnesses. Asha's mind reeled. Not 2 betrayers. 1 traitor and 1 spy. And she just walked herself into the exact center of both their worlds. "Wright doesn't run when he loses," Sarah said grimly. "He cleans up. And you, Asha, are now the single biggest mess he has left to clean." Back in the ballroom, the lights surged on as suddenly as they'd died, and Tae-Joon turned to find the space beside him empty. The gold gown gone. Asha gone. For 3 years he had kept his face perfectly under control. The thing that crossed it now was not controlled at all. He grabbed the nearest of his men by the collar, his voice gone to something low and lethal. "Every exit. Now. Find her." And then, quieter, to himself, in a voice no one was meant to hear, "I never told her." The one thing he'd been saving for after they survived. And he might already be too late to ever say it. 2 floors down, in the underground garage, Marcus Wright stood beside a waiting black car and adjusted his cufflink with the calm of a man who had never once lost. He'd cut the lights himself. He'd known the moment the bookkeeper read that clause aloud that the clean version of his plan was dead, and Marcus Wright had always kept a dirty version ready. If he couldn't have the empire collapse quietly into his hands, he would simply remove the new owner. A woman who owns half of nothing is no obstacle at all. He checked his watch. His men were bringing her down now. He had perhaps 4 minutes before Han's people thought to check the garage. 4 minutes was more than enough. Sarah got Asha as far as the garage before Wright's men found them, stepping out from between the pillars in the cold buzzing light, 3 of them, unhurried. Sarah moved in front of Asha without a word, and Asha understood that the cold spy who dragged her into the dark was now the only body between her and the men sent to erase her. "Whatever happens," Sarah said quietly, not turning around, "you stay alive. You're the only one who can testify to what was in that clause. You die, Wright wins. So you live. Understand me? You live if I don't." Across the garage, the elevator gave a soft, final chime. The elevator doors opened and Tae-Joon was through them before they'd fully parted, and the temperature of the entire garage changed. Wright's men turned. For one frozen second the whole scene held, 3 killers, 1 spy, 1 woman in gold, 1 man who had just discovered there was something on this earth he was willing to burn the world down to keep. "Step away from her," Tae-Joon said. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "Whatever Wright is paying you, it isn't enough to be standing where you're standing." Asha's eyes met his across the garage, and in that one look she understood that the thing he'd been saving to tell her, the thing he'd refused to say to a woman who might die, he was about to make true with his hands instead of his mouth. Marcus Wright stepped out from behind the black car, unhurried, the only man in the garage who hadn't tensed. "Han," he said warmly, as though they were old friends meeting at a club. "You've had a complicated night. Let me simplify it for you. The woman owns half of a thing that no longer exists, because I've already gutted it. So she's worth nothing to you and everything to me, in the sense that she's the one witness who can put me in a cell." He spread his hands, reasonable, almost kind. "Give her to me, and you keep what's left. Keep her, and I take everything, including the few people you have left who haven't already sold you." His eyes flicked, deliberately, to Sarah. "Isn't that right, Agent Kim?" The word landed in the cold garage like a dropped match. Tae-Joon's head turned, just slightly, toward Sarah. And in that half-second of divided attention, Wright's hand moved toward his coat. It happened in less time than it takes to read it. Sarah shouted a warning. Tae-Joon spun back toward Wright. Asha, closest of all, saw Wright's hand clear his coat and saw exactly where it was pointing, and it was not pointing at Tae-Joon. It was pointing at her. And she understood, in the strange slow clarity that comes right before everything changes, that Wright had been telling the truth about one thing. She was the witness. She was the only thread left that could hang him. Remove her, and the whole case Sarah had spent 6 years building died with her in a parking garage in a gold dress. She didn't think. She moved. 3 things happened at once in the cold buzzing light. Sarah threw herself at Wright's arm. Tae-Joon crossed the space between himself and Asha faster than a man that size should be able to move, his whole body turning to put himself between her and the thing pointed at her chest. And Asha, who had come into Tae-Joon's world 3 years ago to save her brother and had somehow ended up willing to die for the man who trapped her in it, felt his arms close around her and turn her away from the danger in the same instant the sound tore through the garage. One single, deafening crack. And then the cold light overhead flickered, and the gold of her dress was very bright against the dark, and time stopped meaning anything at all. The garage went silent except for the buzz of the lights. Tae-Joon held her against his chest, his arms locked around her, his face buried for 1 second in her hair, and when he pulled back to look at her his hands were already searching her, her shoulders, her arms, looking for the wound, his composure gone completely, his voice cracking on her name. Asha. Asha, look at me. Where is it? Tell me where. She looked up at him. She opened her mouth. And the thing she finally understood, in the cold light of that garage, with his terrified eyes on hers and her brother's debt and 3 weeks of lies still sitting unspoken between them, was that whatever happened next, the woman who walked into that tower to quit was never walking back out as anyone's bookkeeper again. Her hand rose slowly, and pressed flat against his chest, and came away dark. It wasn't her blood. It was his. He'd turned them in the last half second so that his own body took what had been meant for her, and he was still standing only because he was the kind of man who refused to fall in front of his enemies. The dark stain bloomed slow and certain across his white shirt, and his arms around her didn't loosen, and he smiled at her, actually smiled, the second real one she'd ever seen from him, and it broke her heart clean in two. "There," he murmured, his voice going soft and strange. "Now I get to tell you. While you're clear-eyed. Just like I promised." His hand rose to her face. "I should have said it 3 years ago, the day you walked into my records room and refused to be afraid of me." And then his knees began to give, and his weight came down into her arms, and the words she'd waited 3 years to hear hung half a breath from his lips as the light in his eyes started to dim. Asha Mensah walked into that tower to quit. She walked out owning half of an empire, with a federal agent bleeding out beside her, the man who framed her unmasked, and the man she loved dying in her arms before he could finish the sentence that would have changed everything. And whether he finishes it, whether he lives long enough to say the words, whether the empire she now owns becomes her salvation or her grave, whether her brother survives what comes next, all of that lives in part 2. So if your heart is in your throat right now, if you cannot accept that it ends here, with his blood on your hands and his words unspoken, then you know exactly what to do. Go to the comments and demand part 2. Tell me you need to know if he lives. Because I'm not releasing it until I see this channel screaming for it.